Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers, and in this video we're going to be giving you a multi-tester review of the Suunto Vertical. Now myself and Nick have both been testing this watch, which is now Suunto's most expensive sports watch in their collection. We'll give you a rundown of the key features here and then give you our likes and dislikes and our verdict on whether you should buy the Suunto Vertical. So some quick notes on pricing with the Suunto Vertical, and in terms of what you're getting with pricing, it starts at £545 and goes all the way up to £745, and that is for the titanium version, which myself and Nick have been testing. Now if we look at where that pricing puts the Suunto Vertical in terms of other watches in this category, at that kind of cheaper end, you're looking at things like the Coros Vertix 2, also the Polo Grit X Pro, which is actually a lot cheaper than the cheapest Suunto Vertical. Then you go up to that titanium version, which you're looking at it competing against things like the Apple Watch Ultra, which is actually more expensive. And then you've got all of those Garmins, so the Garmin Fenix 7, 7 Pro, the Epics and the Epics Pro as well. So in terms of that pricing that you can expect to pay for the Suunto Vertical, it kind of sits with all the other watches in this category. So those key design highlights on the Suunto Vertical. The first thing to mention is that this is a watch available with either a stainless steel or a titanium bezel. The titanium bezel version will cost you more money. Now in terms of case size, you're getting something that's 49mm in size. Thickness wise, it's slimmer than an Apple Watch Ultra, probably about the same size as a Fenix 7, maybe a touch slimmer on that front as well. So in terms of the screen, you're getting a 1.4 inch 280 by 280 matrix touchscreen display. Now that is a bigger screen and a higher resolution screen than we got on the Suunto 9 and the Suunto 9 Peak Pro. Now in terms of other features we get here, you are now getting solar charging capabilities on the Suunto Vertical. A bit like you get on Garmin's solar charging watches, you have to be exposed to enough amount of light on a regular basis to really benefit from that extra battery boost. In terms of other features, it is waterproof up to 100 meters, so you can swim with it, and you are also getting a strap that's easily removable as well here too. It's worth mentioning as well, this is the watch that sits above all the other Suunto watches, so everything you can expect to get from those watches are pretty much here, plus the extra things that we talked about here as well too. Okay, so into those key features on the Suunto Vertical. Now, everything we got on the Suunto 9 and Suunto 9 Peak Pro is on this watch, whether that's the level of tracking modes, the sports profiles, the level of data that you're going to get here as well, the kind of training analysis features, the level of training analysis that Suunto offers at the moment, that is going to be all here on the Vertical. There's key areas where you're going to get features on the Vertical that you won't get on the Peak Pro and the 9 Peak as well. The first one being is the ability to view TOPO maps on the watch. Now previously, the experience of using mapping on Suunto watches has really relied on having it on that kind of companion phone app. Now on the Suunto Vertical, you can sync maps or TOPO maps by downloading them from the Suunto app first, and you sync them over to the watch using Wi-Fi, and you have to drop the watch onto its charger to be able to sync them over. From that point of view, you can view the maps in a few different kind of display modes, but ultimately you're getting offline maps, the ability to see stuff, to better navigate. You still have turn-by-turn navigation, which has to be kind of set up in a route built on the Suunto app, but you do now have the ability to view offline TOPO maps on the Suunto Vertical. The other big thing is something that we've seen on a lot of sports watches at the moment, and that is a kind of dual band kind of GPS mode or GNS mode. Now ultimately that mode's there to improve that positioning accuracy, that outdoor tracking accuracy where it can be problematic. So when you are near tall buildings and kind of deep forested areas as well, which can affect or impact on the level of signal accuracy that you get from that positioning data. That is now here on the Suunto Vertical. As I said, everything else that we got on the watch in terms of what we expect to have seen on the most latest Suunto watches is here on the Suunto Vertical. Whether it's fitness tracking features, whether it's smartwatch features, and again all the sports tracking features that we've seen so far, that is all here on the Suunto Vertical as well too. Then we have to talk about battery life, and in terms of the numbers Suunto is talking here, it's definitely putting it up against those big battery powerhouse watches from the likes of Garmin and Coros. Now in terms of the Vertical, Suunto says you can get up to 60 days in its kind of more restrictive basic watch mode. That drops down to 30 days when you factor in things like activity tracking and viewing things like notifications, so kind of using the smartwatch features. Now in terms of the GPS tracking mode, it can go from anywhere from 85 hours up to 30 days. And again, 30 days would be when you reduce the level of accuracy you are tracking that GPS. So pretty impressive numbers. Does it add up? Does it deliver a really good performance in terms of all the other features as well? Let's get into that.
So my likes for the Suunto Vertical start with the design as a whole. I think it's not necessarily the most good looking watch, but I think it's got quite a nice sleek design. I like the little grooves cut around the outside of the watch, and the screen in particular is really quite impressive. For a memory and pixel screen, it's really bright. It's a massive step up on what we've seen from Suunto in the past, which just had quite dull screens, weren't that easy to read. This is a really bright display, easy to read in all conditions. And like I say, it's just a big upgrade of what we've seen from Suunto before, and a little bit better actually than most of the memory and pixel displays on the market. It also feels quite small and light for what is quite a big watch on the wrist. It's not really something I noticed a lot when wearing it at night, which is sometimes the case when wearing very big, bulky sports watches. Maps are probably the biggest plus on the watch, I'd say. The way they do it is a little bit different to Garmin, which comes with the maps preloaded, but you can download the exact areas you need in the Suunto app. It's quite a simple process. It's not that fast. You've got to be set up with Wi-Fi to do it, but it works really well. And the maps on the wrist are very bright, colourful, clear, easy to use, very easy to see a route laid over them, even if they're not completely routable maps like on Garmin watches, which can create routes for you on the fly because they know what trail you're on. With the Suunto, you don't get that. You're basically getting a map with trails overlaying it, but the maps are certainly a good feature on the watch, and they're the best mapping features you'll get outside of Garmin. They're better than the Coros Vertix 2's maps, for example. And then the multiband GPS on the watch delivers, which isn't always the case. Like we've seen multiband GPS, it's very good with Garmin and Apple, but the Polar Ignite 3 had multiband GPS and it was really poor on GPS accuracy, and Coros's watches with multiband GPS haven't impressed me, but luckily the Suunto Vertical's multiband GPS is very good. It's right up there with Apple, I think maybe just short of Garmin's gold standard multiband GPS. I've been using it against the Epix Pro for my testing period of the Vertical, and all the tracks are very close, but you get the odd extra error on the Suunto you don't get on the Garmin, but it's pretty marginal stuff. So yeah, multiband GPS is very good in this watch. It's obviously got really good battery life to back up that multiband GPS, lasting for 60 hours in that multiband tracking mode, which is excellent and better than almost everything else on the market.
So first off, the things that I liked about the Suunto Vertical and things that kind of really stood out for me in a good way, and I think the first thing for me first and foremost is the battery life. Now I would say battery life during tracking, I think battery life in general mode, once I'd kind of realized there were some settings to kind of tinker around with and play around with to get a better kind of day-to-day battery life, that's been very good on the whole as well. But it's really about the level of battery life you're getting when you're in that tracking mode, and even when you are in that top kind of dual band tracking mode as well. When you compare it to what the kind of battery life drop off you get from Garmin's multi-band mode, I think even Coros's dual band mode, a lot of the other brands that are offering that dual band mode, the drop off in battery life is much smaller on the Suunto Vertical, and that's something I've massively noticed. So in terms of being a leader in that space, in terms of conserving that battery life in that top GPS accuracy mode, and I think the Suunto Vertical is pretty much up there in terms of what it's delivering on the Suunto Vertical. Now the other thing I would say, and that kind of lends itself to the battery life stuff, is the GPS performance. And I think, you know, initially I didn't have some great experience with it, and I think the more I've run with the Suunto Vertical, the better the GPS performance has been. I still think it's a little bit slow in places in terms of picking up that GPS signal in the first place compared to some other watches that I've tested recently, but drilling down into the data and looking at the runs that I've done, and I've been using it mainly against Garmin's kind of multi-band modes, obviously against the Apple Watch Ultra's kind of dual band mode as well, and this is up there with those kind of best kind of performing dual band multi-band modes that you're getting on sports watches at the moment. That is a real plus for the Suunto Vertical, because there's a lot of watches that have these dual band modes that are not fantastic, and I think the Suunto Vertical, after this kind of initial kind of runs I've done with it, it's got much better, and I feel like it's up there in terms of what I've been getting on the Garmin Epix Pro, the 9400, 965, the Phoenix 7 Pro, all the watches that we've been testing recently from Garmin. I would say also the Apple Watch Ultra too. So that is definitely a big plus for me. And then the other one is the mapping. Now, we haven't had this kind of level of mapping on a Suunto watch. I think first and foremost, getting the maps onto the watch itself, although it takes a few steps, it's relatively straightforward to do. And experience of doing that has been nice and straightforward in terms of my experience of using the Suunto Vertical. And then the maps themselves, now they're not as detailed as they are on Garmin, but you know, Garmin is kind of sitting there at the top, particularly when you've got those mapping on those Garmin AMOLED watches. But in terms of on this screen, on the Suunto Vertical screen, which is very clear, being able to kind of follow the maps has been absolutely fine. I do think in terms of, you know, setting up some of the mapping support, you know, you still need to kind of play around it in the app a little bit, but in terms of once you've got those TOPO maps on and you care about just having those maps on there and being able to see your surroundings and have a better sense, it also works really well with the touchscreen as well, so that's kind of nice that you have that support there as well too. And I think that's a massive plus for Suunto and the kind of Vertical, because the mapping support on other watches is not quite there right now. There maybe will be a little bit further down the line, but right now, out of the box, in terms of getting the Suunto Vertical, in terms of that TOPO map support, it's very, very good on the Vertical, and it's definitely something that's really stood out in my time at testing.
So my first dislike on the watch is the Suunto user interface, which is just not very good. It's not very intuitive. It's quite laggy on the watch. Like swiping through screens and using the buttons is a little bit of a wait for it to respond, especially when you first wake up the watch after not using it for a while. And the way everything's set up isn't that intuitive. I really don't like the way they do sports modes, where they have these fixed sports modes on the watch, and then to customize one, you have to create an entirely new sports mode, which takes some time with the app. It's not very fast in responding to it. And for example, when you're syncing to the app, you have to have the watch on the watch screen face. If you start moving around on the watch, it stops syncing. So it's little things like that that just aren't very well done, in my opinion. Same goes for the way they use like structured workouts in running and things like that. They have to be loaded on as a Suunto app plus guide rather than being a native part of your data screens. There's a limit on how many of those you can add. It's all just overcomplicated and slightly annoying compared to how every other watch company does it. And I just wish they'd clean it up a little bit just to make it a slightly more enjoyable experience to interact with the watch day to day. The heart rate is also really bad. Like, I've never had a good experience of heart rate tracking with Suunto watches. So at this point, I'm almost prepared to say that maybe that's not compatible with me. Maybe other people are having really good experiences with them, but I just find that it reads way too high on nearly all my runs, and it's just completely unusable. So I very quickly link up a heart rate sensor to the watch to get better data in. Although, coming on to my third dislike, there's not that much point to that, because one thing that Suunto just hasn't really gone big on yet is training analysis. Like, we'll estimate your VO2 max on the watch, and there is some basic training load stuff in the app, but there's not a lot going on there. There's no attempt to do anything like what you get from Coros, Garmin and Polar, or even, and certainly don't go as far as suggesting workouts and that kind of thing. So it's an area it's not a huge essential, I'd say, especially people who are quite experienced athletes, but it is something that other companies are doing, and it's quite a big point of difference when looking at the offerings from different brands. And sometimes it can really elevate a watch. Like Garmin's training readiness feature, I think, is really good, really useful for athletes of all levels, actually. And Suunto just doesn't have anything like that. And same goes for smart features, actually. It's just not a very smart watch at all. Like, even the way it does notifications, I can't find a way to put notifications on this watch so they come only when I'm not working out. So a notification will arrive when I am working out, and twice I've had tried to hit a lap button during track workouts, and all I've done is expand the notification, which is obviously not what I want to do. So you either have to turn notifications completely off or put it in do not disturb mode for workouts, but it's not something it seems to do by itself. Whereas again, lots of watches, I want notifications when I'm not working out and not when I am. And there's lots of little refinements like that to the user interface. There's not much smart, there's not much training analysis. Suunto's obviously gone quite big on some areas to try and catch up with their rivals, but then are still lagging way behind on things like smarts and training analysis, which is okay, but it's an expensive watch and it's an obvious difference to what you get from other companies.
Okay, so into those dislikes, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is the software. And when I'm talking about software, I'm talking about the experience that you're getting on the watch, off the watch, but I'm also talking a little bit about the performance in terms of how that software kind of runs as well on the Vertical. Now, I think the first thing that really stood out for me is that, and I've seen this on a few of kind of Suunto's most recent watches, is that it just feels a little bit laggy in terms of interacting with the menus, navigating around the watch in general. It feels almost, in some places it's absolutely fine, but in other places it's just a bit laggy. You compare to what you get on a Garmin, I think even Coros, similarly priced Coros watch, also Polar's as well. I think Polar's still has that kind of laggy element to it as well, but I think in terms of my experience of using the watch and when I've had to interact with it, it does, it is laggy, and I just think it needs something to power it a bit better to make it feel a little bit more slick. The other side of it is that I think the interface itself doesn't feel massively intuitive. I think in terms of where things live and kind of where you have to find things and how it's kind of packaged together on the watch, I just think it needs a little bit of work on that front. It's, it doesn't mean it's not totally a disaster, but I think, in terms of when you compare it to how you interact with a Polar, a Coros watch, a Garmin watch, this just feels like it's lagging a little bit behind on that front as well too. And then I think in general, you know, the app, I think, again, you could probably level this at all of the kind of big major sport apps from Polar. I think Coros is kind of pretty simplified as well, and then you've got Garmin and Suunto's one as well, which they're all a little bit busy, but I think, you know, Suunto's one just needs to kind of clean things up a little bit. You know, it's almost there, but I think, you know, again, it's quite busy and where things kind of live and how it's kind of presented. But ultimately, I think the main thing for me is the software on the watch and the improvements that need to be made in terms of layout, but also in terms of the level of performance and getting that lagginess away and out of Suunto's watches. The other thing I would say is heart rate tracking. Now, not a massive surprise. Earlier Suunto's, I had a really good, strong kind of performance from the heart rate monitoring, particularly at kind of high intensity exercise. In terms of what you get in the Suunto Vertical, I think, you know, it falls into that category of optical sensors where it's good on steady runs, pretty slow pace runs. If you pick up the intensity, you still have that odd moment you get the spikes, the weird spikes, the kind of weird drop-offs, and, you know, in the comparison tests that I've done. Now, thankfully, you can pair it to a heart rate monitor chest strap. I managed to successfully pair it to Garmin's HRM Pro Plus chest strap with no problems. It was very straightforward. So from that point of view, you can alleviate those issues if you do rely on the heart rate monitoring. Ultimately, you are, I think, going to have to get a more accurate external heart rate monitor to get the best data or heart rate data out of it. The other thing I think I don't absolutely love, and it's not going to be a big deal for everyone, but I do like using my sports watch as a smartwatch as well. I do like having, you know, the ability to kind of view my notifications in a really easy way. I kind of like having the ability to see weather and my calendar appointments, sometimes being able to control my music as well when I can't, you know, reach for my phone, and in terms of what you're getting on the Suunto, it's just not really there in terms of, you know, Garmin is the leader in this space. Obviously, you've got the Apple Watch Ultra as well. You know, those are the two that really kind of offer a really strong smartwatch and sports watch experience. I think Polar is catching up. Coros, again, is trying to kind of build that into its ecosystem as well. And I think Suunto kind of falls into the same category, I think, in terms of Polar and I think Coros as well. If anything, it's a bit more simplistic. Notification support is a bit, I don't know, it's not great, I don't think, you know, it kind of pops up, but it doesn't feel like it's part of the proceedings. Again, it's the same thing with the music features. You've got the music player, and you can activate that during when you're tracking from one of the screens, but it just doesn't feel like a smartwatch. And if that's something that you want, and that's something that I do like having, then I don't think you really get that on the Suunto Vertical.
So I really like the Suunto Vertical. I think it's a big leap forward from what we've seen from Suunto in the past. I think it's the best watch I've ever used from Suunto. I think they've nailed some very important areas that need to be improved, like the brightness and clarity of the screen, the accuracy of the GPS, the battery life, all that stuff brings it up to a level with the watches from other brands out there. It still lacks in some areas, but, you know, on some key areas now Suunto is at a level, and I think if I wasn't using one of Garmin's top watches and you're looking in that area of the market, I think the Suunto Vertical is probably the best alternative. Really impressive all-round watch, especially if you're in need of maps in particular. Fortunately for the Suunto Vertical, Garmin does exist, and it has so many watches now in this top bracket, you know, ranging from the Forerunner 955 and 965 up through the Phoenix range, the Epix range, the Enduro 2. There's loads of very expensive, very, very good watches in Garmin's range, and, you know, a few of them are around the price point of the Suunto Vertical, and they just offer more, both in terms of features and just better performance as well. So even the areas that the Suunto does really well, like maps, Garmin's mapping features are simply better. You get little tools like Climb Pro. They're routable maps, so Garmin knows the trail you're on and can help you find a new route if you need to change halfway through a route, that kind of thing. It's just a better feature with Garmin watches. Similarly, the sports tracking is more intuitive and easy to use. And then you're getting a whole load of training analysis and smart features, including music storage, things like that you don't get with the Vertical. So if you're looking at the Phoenix 7 range or the Forerunner 955 or 965, quite similar in price to the Vertical, especially if you're looking around in sales and that kind of thing, and you're just going to get a better watch with those watches. Something like a 965 even has an AMOLED display. So unless you have a really big key reason you do not want to go with a Garmin watch, which would be fair enough if you have that reason, I think it's a clear pick to go for one of those watches like the Phoenix or the 965 or 955. They're just better all-round watches than the Vertical. If you really want to go for the Vertical though, it is a really good watch. It does lots of stuff really well now. It's a big improvement from Suunto. I think it's brought it up to a level with other brands where it can be very competitive, but Garmin is still quite dominant in this area of the market. And there are some areas that Suunto's going to need to improve on to match up to it, I think. But I would say the Vertical shows that they're on the right path, and I'm a lot more optimistic and positive about Suunto having used this watch than I have been over the past couple of years.
So my verdict on the Suunto Vertical, and this is definitely the best Suunto watch I've used in a very long time. This is the watch that I thought the Suunto 9 Peak and Peak Pro were going to be. We've got it in the Vertical instead. Now, it's not perfect. There's still work to be done, I think, particularly on the software side of things and how it's packaged and presented on and off the watch. But in terms of that core kind of tracking experience, whether it's that kind of dual band GPS, whether it's the battery life when you are tracking as well, whether it's the kind of addition of maps as well, which obviously is free here as well too, and it's very well presented in terms of what you're getting there on the watch itself. These are the kind of things that we've wanted from Suunto. Now, if we look at how it compares to other watches from other brands around this price range, so I guess you're looking at things like the Fenix 7 Pro, which is a little bit more expensive than the kind of top end Suunto Vertical, and then also I guess the Epix Pro as well. Now, the biggest thing you're getting on those two watches, I would say, is the mapping experience is a lot better. But similarly, you're getting very good battery life. I think on the Garmin, you're maybe getting a stronger UI and software kind of experience on the watch. I think it's just a little bit nicer kind of presented. It's easier to kind of get around and kind of work with, and it just works a little bit slicker as well. Now, if we look at other things like the Polar Gritex Pro, which I think, Polar does a really good job in terms of its kind of training analysis, and it's got some really nice, again, I think the software works and is presented pretty nicely on its watch as well. But in terms of the mapping support and how it works and what you have to do to get those maps on there, the battery life that you're getting doesn't really match what you're going to get on the Suunto Vertical. And again, it's a little bit cheaper, the Polar Gritex Pro compared to the Suunto Vertical, but I think it's worth paying more money for even the cheaper Suunto Vertical model. And then you look at the Coros Vertix 2 as well, which again is near the kind of cheapest end of the price range with the Suunto Vertical. You're getting, big battery life on the Vertix 2 as well. I think the execution of mapping on the Vertix 2 is not as good as it is on the Suunto Vertical, whether it's kind of getting those maps on and the presentation of the maps as well. You may be getting a little bit more in terms of the analysis on the Coros Vertix 2, and I think the UI is kind of getting there. But ultimately, I think, if you are looking for a watch outside of what Garmin offers, that offers something that's got strong battery life, strong GPS performance, good presentation and delivery of maps as well, then those would be reasons to go with the Suunto Vertical. I think personally I would still be looking to go for a Garmin Fenix or an Epix, but I think if I saw the Suunto Vertical at a good price, knowing what I know now, I think it's a much stronger option alternative to what Garmin has to offer. And I think that is massive kind of, plaudits to Suunto for finally, I think, getting to where it needs to be, and it feels like the Suunto Vertical is showing that it's going in the right direction. It's not quite there yet. It's not the perfect watch, but it is on the right kind of path in terms of getting a really strong alternative to what Garmin has to offer. Definitely bettering what Polar has in this kind of space. And I think the Coros Vertix 2 and Coros in general will be looking at what Suunto has done here with the Vertical and thinking maybe we need to up our game as well too. Okay, so there you have it. That is our multi-tester review of the Suunto Vertical. Now, if you've got any questions about this watch or any other features that you want to know a little bit more about, let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos, and yeah, we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.